there should be some thinking around what a possible exit looks like. Right? It doesn't mean that you want an exit. It doesn't mean that you can make an exit happen. But at least you can think that, look, these are some ways I can fit into the world in the long term, right? Um, a few things that I think there are a lot of risks in building a startup. I think a lot of startups are features and not products. And that is very apparent to people who kind of been in the space and who kind of have that lens. Um, uh, but it is not apparent to a lot of young folks. And let me just close with the last thought, that I think also one of the things that people sort of need to realize that I think, unfortunately, we are still young as a country in terms of technology curves. Is that technology, goes through these S waves. So from starting a company to growing it to sort of peaking to sort of like, maturing of technology, there's a very standard S curve. It lasts anywhere from 5 to 10 years, not longer than 10 years. Because by 10 years, and everything has become commoditized. And you got to figure out like your game within this 5 to 10 years, right? And so that sometimes means, you take exits early, right? If you're not one of the leaders in a certain segment and sort of you feel like the technology curve is moving to the right and your technology is becoming commoditized and it's getting built into as features into other platforms, just something for you to think about is, hey, maybe that's a good time to exit, right? And so I think, I don't know, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of these sort of like things that you learn from experience that are kind of not part of the folklore yet, uh, because they are like long-term things. So, how many people have seen a 10-year sort of a startup curve in this part of the world? Very few people, I think. And so the things that are sort of implied by that are not sort of haven't become clear. So there are some things that quickly come out to the top of my mind when you ask that question.
Got it.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there, Joydeep, and that's um, super interesting. I think I'd like to dive deeper into some of these sections, and I know Goan would as well. Um, but before you do that, when you spoke about GTM, right, and I think that's a logical place to start with because I really, really, really completely resonate with what you said, where good entrepreneurs, they should think GTM first and almost build a product around it. Because if you're approaching a market which, let's say, finance or procurement at like enterprise companies, you're not going to invest in like a self-serve motion or anything like that, but rather you're going to invest in like maybe a partner-led motion or something like that. The kind of investments you make on the product side dramatically differ based on that. Um, One of the things that we've had our successes like Freshworks and Zoho, but what I don't see a lot of people actually talk about is I actually feel like one of the big advantages of entrepreneurs in India when it comes to actually selling globally is focusing on enterprise upfront. And the
Right.
reason almost is because they're able to customize and configure the application a lot more just because you just need a lot of bodies to actually end up doing that. So when I look at companies like, let's say, a Whatfix or an Axel Data or an Innovator and so on and so forth, extremely large engineering teams, and they sell to enterprise upfront. For someone who's never sold to enterprise before, it feels scary, right? Or Amagi, that another $100+ million business. Do you feel like that's a trend that's worth following at some sense? Like instead of going SMB and then eventually going enterprise versus start enterprise first, get those large ticket sizes, and maybe work your way down if you even want to.
Both are valid. Obviously, both are valid stories and valid plays. I think my perspective is that founders should figure out what they want to do. These are different models. They mean different ways of building the product. Um, and different GTM motion, as you pointed out. If you're landing $1 million customers, you will not get like one every day. One get You might be lucky to get one every quarter, or So it's a very different GTM motion. Um, Different team DNA. Like obviously, you need to have like sales DNA in your team to sell a very high value product. Services DNA is still easy. I think services DNA comes naturally to us. I don't think that's a difficult one. But I think the sales DNA, a lot of us don't have it. I will be just honest, right? I'm not a I'm not a sales DNA person myself. So I think I would my suggestion would be that founders should think about whether this is something that they are comfortable with, they enjoy doing, probably means also transplanting yourself, almost certainly, or at least traveling a lot, if not transplanting. It certainly means, I think, having some presence, permanent presence in the valley, in the US in general, and so on, because you can't pull this play off without, every one of the companies that you mentioned, and I know the founders of most of them, their founding teams are either partly or fully in the States. So there is a bunch of things that come with that. And I think I think you cannot have a mixed, I think, as I mentioned in the previous discussion, companies need to be aligned. You cannot do mixture of strategies. You cannot sit out of here and build a company like that. Right? If you want to sit out of here and build a company, you don't build that. You build something else. You probably build something like a Zoho or a Freshworks. But if you're comfortable and able to make that move and go and sit there, then yes, do make that happen. But realize that I think at that point you should also, you will need to raise much more capital. You'll need to get in people who have a good sales DNA, or spend a lot of time doing sales yourself. Right? Which you can do if you have a deeper sort of a technical bench and a deeper team that can take care of some of the building part. Right? So that's kind of my perspective. I think there is no right or wrong. Ultimately, I think the any world, is kind of like all these different shapes of rocks, and there's room for different shapes of rocks. There's no best or worst, and so on.